Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 10 preview. In this weekly series I take you through all the different dilemmas and discussion points for the upcoming game week and do my best to give you the best possible advice and help you with your FPL teams. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, in this first section, we're going to discuss the midfielder revival. Now, the reason that I've called it that is because in recent weeks, we've spoken about the fact that you need a three-striker formation, preferably a 3-4-3. You need the likes of Kane, Haaland, Mitrovic, Isak, Tony, Solanke. There were all these strikers that we wanted to choose from. However, in Game Week 9, a lot of the midfielders went absolutely massive with the likes of Foden, Bowen, Maddison, etc., Trossard. And also, I just think a lot of people are starting to look at these midfielders, especially with some of the fixtures they've got coming up. So what I thought it would be useful to do is to look at some of these midfielders. Now, we're not going to discuss the budget midfielders because we've done that a lot in recent weeks. We will actually discuss Trossard himself at the end of the video. But this section here is for those sort of £8 million and around that price midfielders that at the start of the season, we thought were going to be essential. I was discussing the fact that we've got £7-8 million mids. They all look fantastic. And then all of them went on to actually really struggle at the start of the season. I think there has been a little bit of a revival recently. So I'm going to discuss now, if I were on wildcard or if you're just using your transfers, which of these midfielders would I personally be targeting? So I've got all the way from Bernardo as the cheapest at 7, all the way up to Diaz. Like I said, there are some cheaper ones with the likes of Grealish and Trossard, but we can't discuss every player in every video. So we're focusing specifically on that sort of bracket from 7 to 8 million here. So with respect to the cheaper players, you've probably got, let's ignore the sort of £8 million-ish players at the moment, and you've got Bernardo up to Mount. So in this bracket here from sort of 7 to 7.6, who are the players that I would be looking at? So realistically, there is probably only one. Zaha, in my opinion, is still a fantastic choice. Now, there are sort of mixed opinions on Zaha. A lot of people still understand why we're bringing him in, but others are saying his returns have been inconsistent. In FPL previously, he's been very inconsistent as well. Why are we targeting Zaha? There's 2 or 3 reasons. The first is the fixtures are fantastic for Palace. So as you can see, according to the Fantasy Football Hub fixture ticker, from Game Week 10 to Game Week 16, Crystal Palace have the second best fixtures from an attacking perspective. So you are really targeting those Palace fixtures. The second reason is he's on penalties and pretty much nailed for 90 minutes. So when he plays, he's going to play most of the minutes available in that game, and he's on penalty. So even if he's not playing well, even if Palace aren't playing well, if he's on the pitch for almost every minute, he's always got that opportunity for a penalty, and that is genuinely massive. Even if he only gets 5, 6, 7 penalties across the season, if you can own him for 8 game weeks, you could get 1, potentially 2 penalties in that period. We actually saw at the back end of last season, I think Palace got 2 or 3 penalties. I suppose the issue with Zaha is that his conversion rate from penalties isn't great, I should say, but I still think he's a good option for that reason. And then the final reason is his data is actually very good. As you can see, his non-penalty, so even when you remove penalties, his non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 is actually 0.64, which I believe is third best on this list of all of the options. So he's got the fixtures, he's got the minutes, he's got the penalties, and he's got the best or third best non-penalty expected goal involvement. I just don't think there are any reasons not to go for Zaha. So I'm looking at my team currently. Zaha's the one that I really want in. And I think in the next 2 weeks, they play against Leeds and Leicester. Yes, Leicester didn't concede in Game Week 9, but 1, they were playing against Forest, and 2, I believe they conceded 1.35 XG. So they were quite lucky not to concede. So I still think that Leeds and Leicester are 2 decent fixtures to target. And I just think that Zaha's a very safe option right up until the World Cup. So for me, between 7 and 7.6, that cheaper price, it has to be Zaha. I have got some other options on here. I've put Bernardo just in case you want to cover a cheaper City asset. To be honest, I'd probably go all the way down to Grealish, or maybe I'd probably, as we're going to discuss in a second, probably go for Foden. And then you've got the 2 Manchester United midfielders in Sancho and Antony. Antony's data has been very good, but as you can see, he's only played 148 minutes, right? He's not played enough minutes for us to tell whether that data will be consistently good. And Sancho's data since being in the Premier League just is not good enough. So whilst I'm a Manchester United fan and I would love an excuse to own Manchester United players, I don't think Sancho and Antony are owns for me at the moment. Again, if you're going to own a Man United player, you probably go all the way down to Rashford. Gundogan, his data's always very good, but I am just worried. I haven't had any updated news on the Rodri injury, but number 1, he's not nailed, Gundogan, and that is an issue. And number 2, whenever Rodri's out, if he's out for a longer period and Calvin Phillips isn't back, there's a chance Gundogan sits a little bit deeper. So I just think for all of those reasons, with the other options you have available, Gundogan's a no for me. Then you've got Mason Mount as the final player in that sort of cheaper bracket there. I don't mind him. Obviously, under Potter, we might see an improvement in his numbers, but his numbers are very poor. They're the worst on this list at 0.24 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So considering the incredible options that we've got in and around that, I just don't see any reason to want to go for Mount. So from those options, the short of it is basically Zaha. I think where we start to get interesting is Saka, Maddison, Bowen, Foden, and Diaz. I think there's justification to go for any of them. We'll start with Saka. Saka's probably the most nailed on this list along with Bowen. As you can see, he's played 709 minutes. He's going to play 90 minutes pretty much every game. He's going to start every game for Arsenal as well. And as far as we know, he's still on most penalties for Arsenal as well. Yes, if Martinelli wins one, maybe he takes it. But generally, he should be on pens. He's absolutely fantastic when he plays. And I think we have seen an improvement in Saka's form in the last couple of weeks. The issue that I've got with Saka, the fixtures aren't great. They blank in game week 12, and his data's actually not that good. You can see his data's the same as Bernardo Silva, slightly better than Bowen and Mount, but nowhere near as good as some of the other options here. So I just think with the fixtures, with the blank, and with the fact that the data's not great, Saka's probably not on my list at the moment. If you own Saka, obviously you always run the risk of selling a player as talented as him, especially when he's probably on penalties. I would probably be looking to offload Saka and then maybe get him back, maybe at an even cheaper price than 7.8 later on, maybe like game week 13, 14 and beyond. So realistically, I think the four options that you've got are the four most expensive ones. They have all aligned to be 8.1 now, right? Some of them started at 8. Bowen obviously started at 8.5. But Maddison, Bowen, Foden and Diaz now all around the same price. I think all four of them are fantastic options. Maddison is obviously a great pick. He smashed it in game week 9. His data's good, not great. So he's got a 0.54 non-penalty expected goal involvement. But Leicester have pretty good fixtures, especially over the next few weeks. Right up until the World Cup, I'm not so sure. But what you could do, and I really like this as an option, is go for Maddison over the next couple of weeks. They've got Bournemouth this week, still decent fixtures. And then around game week 13, that's when you could look to the likes of Saka or a Luis Diaz. So maybe Maddison short term, and then you can use him as a makeshift, like a move to one of the other midfielders, such as a Saka, such as a Diaz. So I don't mind doing that if you want to. I think holding Maddison right up until the World Cup is absolutely fine as well, but the fixtures aren't perfect in the immediate few weeks before the World Cup. As you can see, Bowen doesn't have a star next to his name, and if you're wondering what the stars mean, these are my favourite players from those on this list. My main issue with Bowen is when I put him on my wild card, there were two reasons for picking him. Number one, the fixtures, and number two, it was a bit of a gut feeling. I just had a gut feeling that Bowen would do well. He did end up doing well. You could say it was quite lucky, though, because his data's just not been good. As you can see, he's the second worst on this list, only slightly ahead of Mason Mount. So I can't sit here as a content creator and do my job, which is give you objective advice and suggest that you should bring Bowen in. The fixtures are good, yes. As you can see, the 4th best in the league, according to Fantasy Football Hub, up until the World Cup. So West Ham have good fixtures, but Bowen's data is so poor that the only way I could suggest it to you is to say, target the fixtures. He's nailed. He might be on penalties, and I had a gut feeling. So by all means, bring Bowen in. I do think that there are better options outside of Bowen now, though. You've missed that 14-pointer. Ignore that. By bringing him in now, you're not going to get those 14 points. Try and find the next Bowen, or try and find someone with better data to pick. So for me, as a content creator, I shouldn't suggest you bringing in Bowen, but of course, I own him, and I'm pretty happy owning him over the next few. I think we get to two of the best options, though, next, and this is because they play for good attacks. So we're going to start with Foden. I think, obviously, I chose Foden on my wildcard again. It was a fairly lucky pick, I guess, that he got. Obviously, I didn't expect 4 goals in 2 game weeks, but what I love about Foden, the reason I picked him, is he's significantly more nailed than people give him credit for. He started every game this season for City, every single game for City. Yes, he's had a couple of sort of early subs around half-time, but generally, you feel relatively confident most weeks Foden will start. He will definitely get the odd rest. He's never going to start every game this season, but he's one of the more nailed players. I would argue he's as nailed as Kevin De Bruyne, as nailed as Haaland. I think he's that important to their team. And I think, especially off the back of a hat-trick, I think Pep will find it very difficult to rest him. And what we've seen with Foden in the past as well sometimes is when he does get rested, he doesn't always come on the pitch. So I like Foden for all of those reasons. And like I said, the data is always strong. So Foden has the best non-penalty expected goal involvement on this list at 0.73. So I think with the fixtures that they've got post-game week 13, with the fantastic non-penalty expected goal involvement, the great amount of minutes that he gets, the projected points as well, I think Foden's a great pick. My only slight concern with Foden is, of course, the blank in game week 12. And I think if you're already struggling slightly to field a good 11 in 12, it just might not make sense to bring in Foden now. It might make more sense to try and wait until game week 13. I suppose the issue you have with that is that you've got Southampton this week, and then you've got Liverpool the week after, and Liverpool don't look great defensively. And then, like I said, from 13 onwards, he looks great. So definitely if you own him, I probably wouldn't be selling him anytime soon. But if you don't own him, it causes a tricky one for you, because you could get the likes of a Maddison, a Bowen, or a Diaz who have decent fixtures but also play in game week 12. So that's something that you need to think about for your specific team. Just finishing with Diaz, I think he's an absolutely fantastic option. Yes, Liverpool haven't been great, but you've got to think they're still scoring goals. So yes, it was 3-3 against Brighton, right? That's not great from a Premier League perspective, but from an FPL perspective, you've got to think Liverpool scored 3 goals against the Brighton defence, which in the past, yes, it was under Potter, has been pretty good. So I really still like Diaz. The only slight concern is he was benched, obviously, in game week 9, and that will probably happen more and more now that Jota's back. So Jota can play on the left, they can play Darwin through the middle, Firmino through the middle. They actually started Carvalho in game week 9. So I don't think Diaz's minutes are as certain as they were earlier on in the season, but he's got the highest projected points on this list. He's got relatively decent non-penalty expected goal involvement, and I think he's a nice way into that Liverpool attack, which, regardless of how well you think they're performing, they will continue to score goals. So if I had to give you my top 3 picks at the moment, I think Zaha and Maddison are definitely top for all of the reasons I've listed. I would still put Foden in there, even with the blank, but I just think you need to take that into account. And if you've already got 3 or 4 players that are blanking in 12, you probably don't want to bring in another one. So that's something to think about for Foden. And then maybe like Diaz and Bowen in sort of 4th and 5th for those options outside of that. But of course, these are all relatively expensive players and you can't own them all. So if you are prioritising, I think it's got to be Zaha this week. And outside of Zaha, probably Maddison as my top 2 options. Let me know down below what your midfield currently looks like. List your midfielders. Who from these are taking your fancy at the moment? Who do you want to own and who might you be transferring in for game week 10? So I thought I would just discuss Kevin De Bruyne and Salah. A lot of people will be in positions where they might have been looking to go from one to the other at some point. For example, De Bruyne owners might have been looking to move to Salah in game week 12 and are now thinking, hang on a second, do we just bench De Bruyne in 12, maybe accept the fact that it won't be a perfect week and then move and then have him from 13 onwards? Do we still move for Salah? And maybe a lot of Salah owners are currently looking at it and going, even with the blank in 12, do I switch Salah to De Bruyne this week? Because Salah's playing Arsenal. He doesn't look as great as he was last season, of course. And Kevin De Bruyne's got Southampton at home. He looks fantastic. What on earth do we do? So I can't explain for every single situation what I would do. But what I thought we could do is just look at their underlying data, look at their touch maps here as well, and just have a bit of a chat about the two of them. So as you can imagine, obviously, I don't own either of these, so it's difficult for me to say what I would do in your specific situations. But both of their data is fantastic. Both of their data is always fantastic. However, Kevin De Bruyne has most certainly stepped it up this year, and there has been a slight drop-off with Salah. That being said, they're actually still fairly comparable. So let's look at each of them. So minutes per game, Salah's getting 90 minutes per game. So one of the main things for Salah is he's always on the pitch, which always gives him an opportunity to score. And because he's on penalties, as we discussed in the previous section, when a player's on pens and plays 90 minutes, it means whenever their team gets a penalty, they will take that penalty. So that is massive for Salah, right? And when we're looking at per 90 statistics, if a player's not getting 90 minutes on average, you've got to sort of tone down their statistics, right? If I'm looking at De Bruyne's per 90 and he's only playing 76, he's not going to get these sort of statistics every single game. So that's something to bear in mind. It is a massive advantage with Salah that you know when he starts, he's pretty much going to get 90 minutes and he's very rarely going to be rotated unless there is a lot of sort of fixture congestion. So that is an advantage in favour of Salah. Kevin De Bruyne's 76 isn't bad, but you would like to see that slightly higher preferably. When we look at their actual FPL points, obviously De Bruyne is beating him this season at 7.76 points per 90, Salah at 6.14 points per 90. When we look at their expected FPL points, it's pretty similar to actually their FPL points. So Salah is slightly outperforming his expected FPL points, actually. So you can't say that Salah's been unlucky not to get more. His expected FPL points is 6.08, and his FPL points is slightly higher. And then De Bruyne is outscoring by even more his expected FPL points. So his expected FPL points below 7, his FPL points approaching 8. So both of them slightly outperforming their data, but when they're both world-class players, you might potentially expect that anyway. So there's nothing too much to draw your attention to there. Where I think it becomes really interesting is when we split their expected goal involvement by expected goals and expected assists. The reason I say that is I think this is a massive advantage for Salah ahead of De Bruyne, is that no matter how good Salah is, how bad Salah is, I should say, or how bad he is, right, in inverted commas, and how good De Bruyne is, Salah's always a greater goal threat. So as you can see here, his non-penalty expected goal involvement is 0.47, De Bruyne's is 0.31. So even though De Bruyne is in this fantastic form, City are amazing, and Salah's been absolutely terrible, well, that's the narrative, right? Salah's still putting up pretty good expected goal involvement. And again, this is non-penalty. This is without the addition of penalties, which he does have. So I would say this is always, for me, what draws me to Salah ahead of the likes of De Bruyne. De Bruyne is not going to get you many goals. He's going to get you a ton of assists, but he's not going to get you many goals, whereas Salah will get you goals. So as you can see, he's outperforming him by 0.16 non-penalty expected goal involvement. And again, the fact that Salah plays 90 is an additional benefit. He's probably actually doing slightly better than De Bruyne, even more than we can see here. Where it obviously becomes a massive difference is expected assists. So Salah's is pretty good at 0.33. Considering his role was sort of like a wide forward, his expected assists are actually very, very, very high. And especially considering he doesn't take set pieces, That's definitely nothing to turn your nose up at. But De Bruyne's is just absolutely ridiculous. And I think the introduction of Haaland is only going to improve this statistic. But 0.69 expected assists is obviously ridiculous. And that does put De Bruyne's expected goal involvement at exactly 1. Right, so those are ridiculous numbers. He's never put up those numbers before in his career. He probably won't maintain that, but they are ridiculously good for the start of the season. Salah's is actually 0.8. Right? That's pretty much what we've seen in the past from it. It's worse than last season, but in previous seasons before that, I think the season before that when he scored like 22 goals, these were almost identical numbers to what he was putting up then. So I don't think you should look at Salah's statistics and go, yeah, he's a terrible player. He's finished as an FPL option. And I don't think you should look at De Bruyne's stats and go, he's absolutely amazing, because his expected goals, I would want that to be a little bit higher. But I think they're both fantastic options. The other thing that we need to think about, as well as actually just looking at the underlying data, is are they finishing their chances? And Salah just doesn't look confident over the ball. And this is where the eye test, a lot of people will sort of laugh at it or mock the eye test. I think the eye test is important. De Bruyne looks confident over the ball. Every time he puts in a cross, every time he shoots, you feel like he's going to get something. Salah, I just don't feel that confidence. Like in the Brighton game, and this is remarkable to me, Salah had relatively high ownership. I wasn't nervous. And usually when I don't own Salah, like I can't cope at the weekend. I'm so nervous, I'm anxious. I don't feel as nervous not owning Salah, which probably tells you something. And so whilst the data's not bad, whilst he's clearly getting opportunities and creating opportunities, there's something to be said for he just doesn't look quite right. And Liverpool don't look right in general either. So it depends how much weighting you give to that sort of thing. My objective advice based on the data is it's very close, considering the fact that Salah plays 90, considering the fact that Salah's on penalties, and considering the fact that Salah's got higher goal threat, I would actually say, if I were just looking at these stats, if you didn't tell me the two players that I were looking at, I think I would actually prefer Salah's statistics. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Also, the fact that he doesn't blank in game week 12, right? Salah's got West Ham at home, arguably the best captaincy choice. De Bruyne's got a blank. So I guess my specific advice is if you own Salah, if I own Salah in my position, I would keep Salah. I would not sell Salah for De Bruyne this week. I think it's a transfer you're probably going to have to reverse in 12, or you're going to have to do something in 12 to get around for the fact that you're probably going to own Haaland, De Bruyne, Martinelli, maybe a Foden or a Cancelo in there as well. So that's something to think about. And I just think the fixtures after 13, I would back Salah to start to return more than what we've seen here, especially starting to get a couple more goals. He's outperforming his expected assists, but he's underperforming his expected goals. So let me know down below if you own Salah or if you own De Bruyne. What are you currently planning on doing with them? I suppose for most people that own De Bruyne, you're definitely keeping him for now. But are you maybe looking to move to Salah in 12? And more importantly, if you own Salah, what's your current plan? I would personally keep him, but I'm not in your situation, so I can't tell you exactly what I would do. Let me know down below. So this video is already getting pretty long, and we discussed this last week because remember Isak got his injury and we discussed Isak replacements. The table has been updated for the stats this week, and I've also added in a couple of different options and changed the prices and stuff. So it's not exactly the same table, but we did discuss it in detail last week. So the reason I've got this here is, of course, Isak looks like he's probably or could potentially still be out from game week 10. I don't have an update at the moment. And there's worry that Mitrovic could be out for game week 10 as well. It could be that both are back. It could be that neither are back. Unfortunately, when I record this video early in the week, and I'm recording this late on Tuesday evening, I don't know the updates on those two. But I just think with the fact that a lot of us are maybe looking to switch our strikers around, with the fact that Isak and Mitrovic could be out, I thought it would be good to just brush up on the striking options and just to discuss which strikers I think are the best to own at the moment. So as you can see, as per the previous sections, I've just put stars next to my favourite options, and I'm going to discuss those ones in detail. Do let me know down below who you're currently bringing for your striker positions, and who your current 3 strikers are. I still think Solanke's a good option. We've discussed the fact that his data isn't great, but in a similar way to what we've just discussed with Salah, he is on penalties and he does play 90 minutes, and those are 2 massive advantages. And as you can see here, Bournemouth have the best fixtures in the league up to the World Cup from an attacking perspective. So I think excellent fixtures. Per 90, he plays 90 minutes. He's nailed on penalties. I think for all of those reasons, yes, his data's not perfect, but that would be enough at 5.7 for me to bring him in. So I think he's a fantastic option for those reasons. He's not going to blow you away. He's not going to get you 2 or 3 returns a week like Haaland, but you're not expecting that for the price. If he gets you a return every 2 or 3 weeks, probably every 3 weeks, that's probably value at 5.7. So in the lead up to the World Cup, if he can get you like 2 goals and an assist, I'd say that's pretty good for 5.7 million, because you can use the funds elsewhere, especially if you're switching off of the likes of Isak and Mitrovic. Daka's in there as an option. I just think he's too much of a rotation risk. I don't mind him, Burmo and Mopay. I just think that the fixtures over the immediate few game weeks aren't good enough for those two, so I'm not currently considering them personally. I've got a star next to Welbeck. Welbeck's a similar situation with respect to the fixtures, right? The fixtures up to the World Cup, and especially over the next few, aren't perfect. But he does have a really nice fixture against Nottingham Forest in game week 12. And I just like Welbeck. I just think he looks really, really good this season. Again, passing the eye test for me, he looks super, super fit. I just think physically he's really improved this season. His stamina looks good. His injuries look good. And also his underlying data is absolutely brilliant. And not only this season, you can't say it's a fluke this season. The back end of last season in the final, it's either the final 5 or 6 game weeks, he had the best non-penalty expected goal involvement in the league. So he had an exceptionally good end to the season, and he's actually continued that this season as well. And under the new manager, he did play 90 minutes in game week 9 as well, I believe. So he's still going to get minutes this season. I still think he's their starting striker, and he's going to be the furthest forward player for Brighton every single game. So I think for all of those reasons, we saw how attacking they looked against Liverpool. I do think Welbeck could be a fantastic option. And if Mitrovic is out, I'm definitely considering Welbeck as a replacement. I suppose the only issue you've got is the next 2 fixtures aren't perfect for Brighton. But again, Forest in 12, and sometimes with that third striker spot, maybe you don't necessarily always back the fixtures. Maybe you back the player that's showing really, really good underlying data. So for me, Welbeck's a definite option. I'd consider him if I were you. You've got Martial in there as well. That's a bit of a punt, to be honest. If he starts, he's fantastic. I've put NA for his non-penalty expected goal involvement because he's only played 76 minutes. If he'd played more minutes, I would talk about it, but it's just not worth it considering the amount of minutes he's played. But when he starts, he usually has good data, and I do think he's the starting striker for Manchester United at the moment. The issue is there are other options for Manchester United. We could start Rashford up top. We could start Ronaldo up top. We could potentially start Alanga up top. So I don't think he's 100% nailed. I think it's probably a wait and see with Martial. Mitrovic, of course, is a fantastic option. His underlying data is amazing. If he's not injured, don't take Mitrovic out. And if you're looking for an Isak replacement, I would argue Mitrovic is still the best Isak replacement if you don't already own him. But of course, we need to wait for his injury news there. A lot of people talking about Watkins. Watkins' data is actually not terrible. He actually did very, very well against Leeds. He accumulated quite a high expected goal involvement. So his expected goals have actually shot up per 90 from it was about 0.34 to 0.55 because he accumulated such a massive XG against Leeds. So he's definitely, you could say, in form. He did very well in game week 9 to accumulate that XG, but he doesn't always finish his chances. And traditionally, across a long period of time, Watkins doesn't put up the best numbers. So I think if you're looking for a striker which will maybe get you the odd 9-pointer, the odd 5-pointer in there, but isn't going to get you massive hauls and will maybe tick along every few games, maybe you go for Watkins. And the fixtures definitely aren't bad for Aston Villa there. I think Wilson is probably my top option to replace Isak and Mitrovic. If you've got money in the bank obviously for Mitrovic, I would probably consider Wilson the most. In the past, his data tends to sit between 0.5 and 0.8 expected goal involvement. So in past seasons, I think his worst was around 0.5. His best has been up at 0.8. So we've seen Wilson across seasons. I think it was actually for Bournemouth his best season. But we've seen him maintain a ridiculously high expected goal involvement. So whilst I don't ever expect him to maintain 0.92, we know he can maintain a very good level. And I think when he starts, he's going to be fairly nailed. He's on penalties again, which is massive. And his underlying data is very strong. With the fixtures that Newcastle have over the next few weeks, if you take into account, obviously, the Man United and Tottenham fixture, they're still pretty good. I would probably put Wilson at the top of my list. The only thing is, it is a slight risk, as always, when you bring in someone like Wilson, that they're going to get injured over the next few weeks because he's like Bamford. Sometimes he'll come back, and as soon as he comes back, he'll get injured again. But for me, I'm just looking at all of these strikers. None of them really excite me that much. And if I had to go for one at the moment and I had all of the money in the world to do so, it probably would be Callum Wilson. I've just put Tony in there just because he's still a fantastic option. The reason maybe Tony isn't the perfect option now is I think you have lost some of those better fixtures for Brentford. As you can see here, up until the World Cup, they've got the 18th best fixtures in the league. So not great fixtures as an entirety up to the World Cup. But again, as I said, potentially in the Welbeck section, if you've got a striker that's nailed, playing well with good underlying data, and Tony's nailed, like 720 minutes, he's played every minute this season, and he's on penalties, I feel like a lot of people will ignore Tony because the fixtures aren't great. And he's the sort of player where you could just see him scoring most weeks still. So I really don't hate Tony. I suppose with Tony, it's not a very sexy pick. Like he's not that new shiny toy. For example, like Welbeck or Martial, you feel like they could be the new shiny toy. Tony's like, oh, we've had Tony for a few weeks. Other people have picked Tony this season. You almost disregard him for that reason. So maybe try and remove that bias. I'll try and do the same as well. Maybe Tony's the sort of player that could tick along quite nicely. In my specific situation for my team, if Mitrovic is injured, I only have 6.9. I have 0 in the bank. So for me, it's everyone from Mitrovic down unless I want to make 2 transfers. So I'm slightly more limited that I can't go for the likes of Wilson. But if I did, Callum Wilson would be the top of my tree. I should have just mentioned in the previous section, the reason for no Antonio and Scamacca is I just think they will continue to rotate. Yes, Scamacca looked fantastic in game week 9. I think he did anyway. But I also think Antonio looked really good off the bench. So I'm just not confident which one's going to start. And whoever starts is almost definitely coming off around 60 minutes. So for those reasons there, I just couldn't, even with the fixtures coming up and even with the fact that I think the one that does start could do well, I just don't think that their data is good enough for me to select them ahead of other options when I just don't have a clue who's going to start. So in this final section, we're going to look at Leandro Trossard. Obviously, he got a 20-pointer against Liverpool in game week 9. He was actually fantastic before their blank in game week 8 as well. Is he a serious option? I mean, the answer is definitely yes. His underlying data looks good, and I think he'll only continue to get better under the new Brighton manager. There are a few issues, though. So starting with the fixtures aren't great for Brighton, as we discussed with the Welbeck section, but they're not terrible. I think the fixture difficulty rating, the colour scheme, is actually maybe slightly misleading because I don't think Brentford away is necessarily a grey fixture. You could make that a green fixture. And to be honest, Tottenham do concede as well. So I think at the Amex, that could be a decent fixture for Brighton. So I think the next three are actually okay. They do then play Man City and Chelsea. And Wolves have actually had pretty good data this season. Now, of course, they're going to have a new manager, so that might affect the way they defend. I just don't think these are a perfect set of fixtures. So I don't hate Trossard. And again, we're going to discuss how good his stats are. But I just think those fixtures for me don't scream sort of attacking the fixtures. That being said, sometimes you don't always have to bring in the player with the best fixtures. Sometimes if they've got decent fixtures but great stats, that can sometimes be enough. And often people go so heavy on the fixtures that they'll sometimes ignore really good options. So I don't think you should necessarily let fixtures completely dictate your play. But I am a very fixtures-based manager, so I will always lean to them wherever I can. What I've actually got here is I've got his data from the 21-22 season, and I've got his data from the 22-23 season as well. Just to give you a bit of an idea about, yes, is he performing well this season? That's great. But is it something that's maintainable? How did he perform last season? So I think it's good to assess these two things. Of course, he's now playing under a different manager and in a different role as well. So I think this is absolutely critical that we maybe put into context both last season's data, but also to some extent this season's data, because it could change, it could get better, it could get worse. So do apply context to this. We can only hypothesize roughly what might happen. So when we're looking at minutes per appearance, he's getting roughly 82, 83 minutes across the last two seasons. I think when he plays, he's fairly nailed. And to be honest, I think he's Brighton's most talented player. So I would be very shocked if he misses many games. I'd be very shocked if he gets many early subs either. I think if he does get an early sub again, it's probably going to only be a sort of 5 to 10 minutes. His expected FPL points have taken a bit of an increase this season. So 4.8 last season. Really isn't bad for his price. Gone up to 5.94 this season. The real difference between the two seasons, though, when you look at the two sort of stats side by side, the main difference is his goal threat has gone through the roof. So his non-penalty expected goals last season was 0.25. This season, it's more than doubled to 0.51. So he's taking more shots, as we can see, in the box and outside the box. And he also he looks a little bit more like he's looking for goal. And again, this is a bit of an eye test thing. I feel like he wants to score goals this season. And I'm not saying in previous seasons he hasn't wanted to score goals. But you know, sometimes a player just turns on that sort of goal-hungry element to their play. Sometimes a player just decides they want to score goals. It happened, I can't remember if it was last season or the season before with James Maddison. In a few interviews, he was like, I've been working on scoring more goals. Sometimes players just decide at that point in their career, they're going to work on getting into the box more and scoring more. And I think what we've seen from Trossard this season, despite playing large amounts of this season at a sort of left wing-back role, he's been getting into the box a lot and he's been shooting a lot and his expected goals have improved as a result. His creativity's actually dropped ever so slightly, but there's not a big difference there. 0.19 to 0.16. Still pretty decent. So that basically puts his non-penalty expected goal involvement at 0.67, which is really strong. It puts him in the same sort of bracket as just lower than the likes of Phil Foden, higher than the likes of Maddison in the previous section. So he's right up there with some of the very best. And as a result, we've got to consider Trossard. As I said, his touches in the box and shots in the box have increased as well. And like I said, large parts of that were playing at sort of, it wasn't really left wing back under Potter because it was such an advanced role. But I think he's going to play even more advanced under the new manager. I think at points could be even playing as part of a front two. So I think for those reasons, yeah, I think Trossard's a great pick. And I think if you're looking for someone under 7 million and you don't mind the fact that the fixtures aren't perfect with Tottenham, City and Chelsea in the next sort of 5 weeks, I think he could be a great pick. The final reason I do like him is in game week 12 when a lot of us will be struggling to field a perfect team. He's got Forest at home. You could captain him if you want to. I doubt you would want to. There are probably better options. but I do really like him for that fixture, and it means that he might basically save your game week 12. So let me know down below what you think of Trossard if you're potentially looking at bringing him in. I would finally just say that I do think Trossard is the asset to own from Brighton from the midfielders. I think Pascal Gross will probably play a slightly deeper role under the new management, and I also think McAllister, again, he's probably going to be on penalties still, going to be on free kicks, but outside of that, he just doesn't carry much goal threat. So Welbeck and Trossard are the best two players from Brighton for me. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 10 preview video. Hopefully this has helped you with some of your key decisions this week. If there's anything that I haven't answered, please do drop your dilemmas down below and I'll do my best to help as many of you as possible. If you're still watching this and you've not yet liked and subscribed, please do subscribe. And we're going to try and set a really optimistic target, if you're still watching, of 2,000 likes. I would massively appreciate it. It'd be the first time we've ever hit it on this channel, but it would be absolutely awesome. So if you're still watching this and it's not yet at 2,000, please do drop a like. If you do want to see my team selection, I will have a team selection video out at 9 a.m. on Friday, and there will also be a deadline stream on Saturday. So make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications so that you know when those videos go live. But until next time, guys, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.